guys, it's me, Lisa, and I'm coming back at you with another writing video. Today we are talking about point of view, what it is, why it's important, what types exist, and I'm gonna explain them. And also there will be a special myth busting session that I will do at the very end of the video on what people believe the point of view is and what it stands for and what it actually is. So, most of the information I got from the video, I got it from an article that will be linked down below and that you can visit, but also you can go down below and check out my blog post that I made on the subject. And if you feel like it, which I bet you do if you watched the video and liked it, you can subscribe to my emailing list on the blog to receive a notification every Friday when I post a new writing video and writing article, obviously. So, without any further ado, let's get into the explanation of point of view.
Let's go to an art museum, I'll explain it at the coffee shop. I know you don't get it, but there's no need to fret it. It's like a gift.
So we have another episode of the writing series, and it might be that we are talking about a trivial subject. Point of view, people kind of tend to believe they know what it is and what it serves, and they might be thinking, why is it important to decide a point of view? Isn't it just a channel for the main character's events, what happened in the story? Well, yes and no. Point of view is very important because, as said in the previous episodes, it is the character's lens through which the reader perceives the story. So through the point of view, we perceive what the character is experiencing, which is really important, fundamental. And so it is very important to nail the narration and decide what will be the best light into which to portray the events of the story. And it will make it very easy for the reader to understand everything under the best light. It means that, for example, if you were telling a story to someone, you don't really have to decide what way you tell it because you're telling it first person. But when you write, it's different, and there are many options to tell the same story. And so this is very important because the point of view will decide the pacing, the impact, the format, and the suspense of your story. All of those things are determined by the point of view. So it's really fundamental to nail it. And there are various types of point of view, and I'm gonna list them: first person, peripheral, second person, third person limited, third person multiple, third person omniscient, third person objective. Do you feel overwhelmed? Because I definitely do. It's such a huge thing to navigate through all these points of view, and I bet you haven't heard the existence of most of them, because I hadn't before starting to study for this video and for my writing. So it's very important that we understand what we are talking about, and we will do so through examples and in a very canonical way, like in school. I'm gonna tell you what it is, I'm gonna give you an example, and you will understand better than if I simply gave you a definition without explaining more. So when we talk about first person, it's pretty straightforward. You have a main character that is personally thinking through that idea, experiences and struggles. And we have a wonderful example from Children of the Sea. I'm going to read a very small example, but nonetheless, it's going to be great. Children of the Sea is narrated in first person. If you have not read it, I highly suggest you do because it's a great short story. They say behind the mountains are more mountains. Now I know it's true. I also know there are timeless waters, endless seas, and lots of people in this world whose names don't matter to anyone but themselves. I look up at the sky and I see you there. I see you crying like a crushed snail. The way you cried when I helped you pull out your first loose tooth. Yes, I did love you then. Somehow, when I looked at you, I thought of fiery red ants. I wanted you to dig your fingernails into my skin and drain out all my blood. I don't know how long I will be at sea. There are 36 other deserting souls on this little boat with me. White sheets with bright red spots float on our sail. I think this introduction is everything, but regardless of the analysis of the story, which will be redundant in this situation, first person has advantages and disadvantages like every single point of view. The advantages of first person is that it feels obviously very personal because you are telling it to the reader, so it creates an intimate relationship between you and the reader, or the writing and the reader, let's say it this way, and it draws the reader into the story. A con is that it's difficult to describe events that don't happen directly to the main character. It's difficult to keep secrets from the reader if you are narrating in first person, because there is a lot of brain stuff going on and you're gonna pretty much know everything about the person you're reading about. The second option is first person detached. So this one is the perspective of a side character that narrates the events of the main character. And this is narrated by someone that is closed enough to the action to be able to narrate the main events in a kind of objective way, because not being the main character, it gives it an advantage of perspective. And it was especially popular in 19th and 20th century, which not really fundamental to know, but it's interesting. I managed to find the example and we are gonna go with The Great Gatsby, and here it goes. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages you've had. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way, and I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequence, I'm inclined to resolve all judgments, a habit that's opened up many curious natures to me and also made me a victim of not a few veteran wars. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and attach itself to its quality when it appears in a normal person, and so it came about that in college I was unjustly accused of being a politician because I was privy to secret grief and wild unknown men. Most of the confidences were unsought. Frequently I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity when I realized that some unmistakable sign that the intimate revelation was quiveting on the horizon. For the intimate revelations of young men, or at least in terms of which they express them, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppression. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. I'm still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of fundamental decadences is paralleled out unequally at birth. This is not super clear at this example, but obviously this character is speaking about someone else, and the point of this point of view is that the main character will not be the one that is narrating. The one that is narrating will meet the main character and will narrate about the main character. So I think it's a really cool thing, but obviously it's not very much used at this point. The pro that the reader will have a personal link to the story, having the ability to see the main character objectively. And so this is very interesting in some sense, but a con will be that it's unable to feel an emotional connect with the reader, and it's even most through of the first person fairy tale or third person, because the character will remain somewhat of an enigma, because obviously the narration doesn't come from the main character, it comes from a side character, so it can create distance between the main character and the reader. Then we have the second person narration, and usually obviously it describes another person and it uses a lot the pronoun you. and it is used especially in experimental literature and in short works of interactive fiction because it can be very annoying to read. And I get that, because if you read you in every single sentence, it can become really annoying. So it's not super recommended to use unless you have a specific reason for doing so, which could be, but not super recommended. And it's used a lot in the fictional self-help and DIY and self-help book, because obviously they are talking about you, about the reader, and that makes sense. But this is breaking the fourth wall, so it's not anymore talking about a character, it's talking about you, and that can be used only in those particular types of fiction. Pro of using this is that is innovative and it grabs the attention, but a con is that the reader can be pulled out of the story because the second person narration requires more attention to the writing and will annoy the reader. As I said, it can be quite annoying. I'm gonna give you a brief example of it. I got it from the book of Francine Prose, Reading Like a Writer, as she cites another writer, The All-Selling Eye of Doris Day, probably. We didn't in the light, we didn't in darkness, we didn't in the fresh-cut summer grass or in the mounds of autumn leaves or on the shows where moonlight threw down our shadows. We didn't in the room, in the canopy bed you slept in, the bed you slept in as a child, or in the back seat of my father's rooster rumbler, which smelled of smokes, chubs and kielbasa he delivered on weekends from the Uncle Vincent's meat market. We didn't in your mother's buckade, where a rosary twined the review mirror like a beaded black snake with silver cruciform fangs. At the end of our lover's lane, a side street of abandoned factories, where I perfected the pinch that springs open a bra behind the lilac bushes in Market Park, where you first touched me through my jeans, and your nipples, swollen against transparent cotton, seemed the shade of lilacs. In the balcony of the new defunct Chalk Theatre, where I wiped popcorn salt from my palms and slid them up your tights, you whispered, I feel like Doris Day is watching us. We didn't. So this is a cool example of the second person, and here, as we can see, the intention is clear, is the writer talking to a specific reader, which is very interesting, and it can also be seen as some form of first person because it has engagement, but obviously it's not 100% recommended in every style because it can become very boring. Then third person can be divided into many types, but it's the most common point of view used in fiction. You can use pronouns I, you, and you will also have dialogue, and the narrator can be nameless and without personality, and it can have different specificities. So the third person limited is one when the narration only follows one character directly, only showing what the character knows. So it's basically a kind of first person, and the character takes it from personal point of view. So this one, as well as the first person, can help the reader not to get too overwhelmed with too many different points of views and characters, so it's not very frustrating or stressful to write, but at the same time it cannot easily describe obviously events that don't happen when and where the main character is, because the narrator cannot know them. Then there is the third person multiple, which is a perspective of narration from multiple characters, and it shows the events of the story by switching whenever the character is experiencing them, and it can reveal or keep secrets from the reader by writing the perspective from a character that isn't the main one or is the main one. It can have pros and cons for this perspective of knowing and hiding, and is great for stories that have more than one main character. The con is that readers can be confused by the different changes in characters, and it can be difficult to follow because it can require a bit to adjust to the switching thing. And one writer that does it a lot is, for example, Virginia Woolf. She uses it in most of her narratives and switches back and forth without any appearance of logic, and it's very difficult to follow indeed. Beautiful, but very difficult to follow. Then we have the third person omniscient, which is basically narrator that knows everything. And we could have a great example from The Secret Garden, when you can easily impart knowledge without worrying about your character finding out, because the narrator is not directly interested in the character, but it's less personal, and it's also difficult to justify keeping the information secret from the reader if the third person narrator is omniscient. Going on, we have the third person objective, which is like the omniscient narration, except describes only what happens to the character and never anything about feelings, never anything. So the character's emotions are just inferred through what they say and do. And the Scarlet Letter uses it, and it can be pretty tricky because, especially nowadays, people want to know the feelings of the characters. It's a really important part of the story, and it can keep information from the reader, but the link with the characters is lost with this point of view, because it's really difficult to pinpoint what the characters are feeling and to sympathize with them. It's tricky to use. Are all of the different kinds of narrations and point of view, and once you know all of them, and from now you know all of the different types of point of views, what you have to do is to choose which one you want to use and which one is better adapted to your story. And there are some occasions in which it's not super clear if you want to use a first person or a third person narration, because they could seem pretty similar. So I have a practical exercise for you that will help you to decide which one you want to use. Basically, what you have to do is to pick a random scene that your character find himself or herself into, a scene that might be featured, might not be featured in the novel. It's not really important. You have to write this scene from both perspectives. The one of, let's say, first person and third person, or second person, third person, whatever you are indecised or in between something, you have to try all of the possibilities that you have in your mind, and then leave the story to settle for a bit. Then, a couple of days after you have written your extract of that scene, you are gonna go back and you're gonna read it through, and the one that seems more convincing to you is the one that you have to use. And I think this is super effective, because taking a pause from the writing can be a super good and effective way to actually tackle what you want to say, and I think it's gonna be great and interesting. So we have to debunk a myth about point of view. Point of view is just a technical distinction. So a technical distinction between, if I tell you, if I talk in second or third person, just technical. No, it's not. It's not a technical distinction, because it's not simply a way of format through which your main character's opinion is expressed or discussed or featured. It is the way your protagonist evaluates the word that is going around him or her. So this is super important, because the point of view is the ultimate tool that will help you to express your character's feeling through their own perspective. So it's really important to choose the right one to feature your character's intentions and view of reality. So after all of this, I hope that you remained after the video with a clear understanding of the points of views, more techniques to actually apply them to the story. And will to challenge yourself to choose the point of view for the story to start constructing it. I really hope that this video helped you in some way, and if it did, leave a thumb up and subscribe to the channel, and I really hope I will see you in my mailbox for the blog and also next week for the new video. Bye guys!